Welcome to the first Sky Cricket podcast of 2025. Nasser, how are you? How was your Christmas and New Year in Chelmsford? Was it full of joy and cheer?
Same as ever. Not too much joy or cheer Christmas.
Same as ever.
I
You're
went
normally
away,
away.
actually. I went
Where?
away to Turin with the family, of all places, so I liked a little bit of I've never really
Turin.
been never really been to Italy, so between Christmas and New Year, that sort of quiet, dull period, we went away, really enjoyed that, and New Year's Eve, I was in bed by 10 p.m. or whatever, watching TV. And you, where were you? Sydney Harbour or something? Come on, make us jealous, please.
I was in Sydney and Coogee for New Year's, watching the 9. I made the 9 o'clock fireworks. I didn't make the midnight.
We're sounding old.
But it was quite bizarre. Bumped into a lot of English cricketers there. Of course, many of them in the Big Bash, the Sydney Sixes. I think it is, who stay in Coogee. So saw Vince from a distance and Billings, and bumped into Ben Duckett on that walk. That Coogee to Bondi walk, which is a great walk. Ben Duckett was just at the other end of it, pushing a pram.
That's a long walk for his little legs, I tell you. So
absolutely. Bumped into Matthew Mott, sat in a cafe on the Coogee High Street. He was in good form, with Mike Hussey and Greg Shippard, who are coaching in the Big Bash. Matthew Mott's got a gig there, so bumped into quite a lot of people in and around Sydney. And of course, it gave me a chance to watch quite a bit of. I mean, it was an epic Boxing Day test. It really was a fantastic test match that Australia ran out winners of in the end, and obviously they won that series. More than 830,000 people came through the turnstiles to watch that series, which is an incredible number of people. And there really was a fantastic buzz about Test cricket while I was there.
Seemed to grab the nation, didn't it? I mean, viewing figures were going through the roof. Crowds were fantastic. Story day after day, there was a story, really. What did you make of it? I know you and Simon Dool, when we had you on, or had Dooley on, were very strong on Australia winning. You were proved right.
Well, you
got it right again.
You were sitting on the fence as usual with splinters.
I said 3-2. I said 3-2 Australia.
And myself and Dooley clearly, know what we're talking about. We were bang on.
What was the difference between the sides?
Well, India were very reliant on Bumrah with the ball. I think I worked out he took 32 wickets and the rest of the seamers took 40 between them. And obviously, in the end, in a 5-test match series, that took its toll because he missed that second innings run chase. Whether he'd have made a difference, who knows? But I think the lack of form for India's top players, Rohit, Virat, and others, KL Rahul flattered to deceive a little bit, allied with that over-reliance on Jasprit Bumrah, I think in the end was the difference. But I thought it was interesting from an England perspective, because just watching on, I felt that England would have taken some encouragement. I don't know, obviously it's different time zone, how much England's think tank were watching it, but they will have all the footage, obviously, and be studying it carefully. But I think they'd have taken some encouragement from both sides, actually, because they've got 5 tests coming up against India and 5 in the Ashes. Both sides' batting looks vulnerable. India struggled, and Australia struggled as well. Usman Khawaja really struggled at the top. Smith got 200s, but didn't quite seem like the player he was. And Labuschagne really struggled a bit. Mitch Marsh dropped. Carey, when the ball was coming back into him, looked vulnerable. So, unlike perhaps 20 or 30 years ago when we were playing and you looked down the Aussie lineup and thought, how are we going to get 20 wickets here? I can see an avenue for England if their bowlers are fit and they get everybody there fit, where, there might be some possibilities. And I think they'd have been reasonably encouraged by what they saw, even though, both sides played really good, hard, competitive cricket, and it was a fantastic series. Don't know whether you agree with that or not.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fantastic series. It often is when you have two great sides and ball dominates bat slightly, which it did. And that's what I want to touch on with you. Have conditions changed in Australia? I know the ball is still using the Kookaburra, but a different style of Kookaburra, more lacquer on it, a slight ridge under the seam. it did do a lot more. So,
Yeah.
Boland, for example, was getting wickets at 84 mile an hour. England have gone all in with pace. There's a bit of skill involved as well.
You're right. I mean, the pitches were quite helpful. That Sydney pitch was very helpful. They weren't all like that, but they did help a bit. And as you say, that Kookaburra seems to have a bit more lacquer, or they seem to have kind of slightly changed the emphasis of it so that it's a bit more Duke-like, less, goes flat, completely flat after 15, 20 overs, and which I think will make for more watchable cricket. And certainly the cricket was highly watchable in the Border Gavaskar. So, yeah, and for Australia, of course, that bowling attack is very interesting. I mean, Stark, Cummins, and Hazelwood have held sway for so long, Boland as backup, but they're no spring chickens, are they? I mean, Cummins 31, I think. Hazelwood, what is he, 33 or 4, and Stark 35. So yeah, I mean, another 12 months. Some of them are at that stage where they're in what you'd think would be the twilight of a fast bowler's career. Although Jimmy Anderson may suggest that you stretch that a bit more now.
I'm slightly the other way, actually. I think because it's only 11 months away or whatever, 10 months away, I think that the bowling will be fine. They'll look after him. They often rotate. They look after Cummins, and they have
Yeah.
the backup now with Boland, who, Hazelwood is incredible. And you think he goes out and he comes in. I think it's the batting. I think Khawaja,
Yeah.
looks a shadow of the player that he was. You look at, can Sam Constance play that way in Test match cricket at the top of the order? We will have to wait and see. I mean, he went off to a flying start, but after that, can you be scooping every other ball, charging down the pitch every other ball? I mean, you can argue the same thing about Crawley at the top of the order, but I think it's the batting. What did you make of Webster that came in the middle order? He looked quite
Yeah,
an organised player, actually.
he did. He had a good game at Sydney.
Yeah.
Came in for Mitch Marsh. And I suppose you could argue with Constance coming in, Bo Webster coming in, McSweeney had a go. They're starting to regenerate that side. But, in the Boxing Day test, I was obviously in the country for that one. It was a weird age profile in the team because they had Sam Constance, who's a teenager, and they had everybody else over 30. I'd be very interested to know whether any test match team in the past has had no 20-year-olds in their side. It seems remarkable. But as you say, that opens up lots of questions about, that age profile of the batting unit and the bowling unit. But anyway, all that's in the future. 2025's got a lot to bring us, hasn't it? We've got the Women's Ashes starting imminently. Champs Trophy following that. And then a fantastic summer of cricket for England with India coming for 5 tests.
Come on,
and then
give us,
obviously the Ashes.
since you were so spot on with your predictions for the Ashes, for the Border Gavaskar, what are your Ashes and England-India predictions? How do you see it? Who are favourites?
I think England are favourites to beat India at home. And I mean, you have to say Australia are favourites because, how many England teams go and win the Ashes, regain the Ashes down under? Very few. But for the first time since 2010-11, I'm relatively optimistic. And you?
Yeah, I agree with both of those, actually. I do think the Ashes is in particular. I think England at home against India are coming to that phase where some of their batters will be thinking about retirement. It'll be fascinating to see who they bring on that trip. They'll always be a strong side. They've had a poor few months with the New Zealand series at home and then this series in Australia, but they have quality players, depth of cricketers that will come through. I thought they missed Shami in Australia. Shami with those conditions and that ball. Shami in England, if he can get himself fit to back up Bumrah and Siraj, that'll be a seam attack to reckon with. So, but I still think at home England will fancy their chances. Australia, that 2 vulnerable batting lineups and 2 top bowling lineups. I think Australia start as favourites with that. So some great cricket coming up this year.
Yep, and I've got a guest on for you this week, Nass. It's the ghost of test matches past for you. I'm going to take you back to 2003 with our guest. Well, our guest this week gets a very warm glow whenever he sees my co-host in real life, because it reminds him of 21 years ago when he was a bit younger, a bit thinner, and he could play a bit. 259 at Lords, still the highest test score by an overseas batsman. Graeme Smith, very good to see you. Thanks for coming on, and tell us a bit about what's happening. Where are you, first of all?
Yeah, morning to you, Ness. Thanks for the kind intro. Yes. I'm in Cape Town. Yeah, busy time. Just popped through to the New Year's Test match on a couple of days, and yeah, SA20 starting in Jan 9th, so around the corner for us. Busy 4 or 5 weeks ahead.
I referenced that 259, which is timely because it's just been equalled, actually, hasn't it, by Ryan Rickleton this week. But what are your memories of Nasser's drop catch at that point that set you on your way?
Oh, I'll tell you, this has made my day. No, no, I think it started at Edgbaston first. My first tour to England, supremely nervous young man. Managed to get off to a good start with the bat there, myself and Herschel. And yeah, Nas decided after a long 10 years in captain that it was time to walk away. I only got to take him on one occasion, but yeah, I mean,
When
I
he
guess when you
forgot
get
your
to the back
name.
end of your career, you can realize some of those stresses that Nas was feeling on those occasions. But yeah, and I'll be forever grateful that Nas one went through your hands at backward point and hit you in the stomach.
I was absolutely thrilled when Ath said, "Let's get Graeme Smith on the pod." It started way before Edgbaston. The week before Edgbaston, I forgot your first name in a press conference. When I turned up to Edgbaston, I became one of 3 captains that you ended as an England captaincy career. Then I turned up at Lords, dropped you off 10 off Jimmy Anderson. You decide to bat for 2 days and get 250 odd. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you on the pod. What's his name, Smith? Brilliant.
That's how I'm glad you said it. I was going to be kind, but yeah.
Now, you've got a very grand title at the moment, which is Commissioner of the SA20, but it's been a significant role that you've had. Maybe you could just talk us through it. I mean, South Africa had 2 aborted attempts at a kind of domestic T20 competition. Just talk us through that process and how you came to be involved and the setting up of your domestic franchise T20 competition.
Because I think it obviously goes back a few years. As I was reluctantly got involved in the administration of cricket in the country because I think it had taken a bad turn. Sponsors were walking away, performances were average. There was just so much negative around the administration. So I decided that I would jump in to the role. It was probably the longest 2 years of my life, very involved in trying to sort of right the ship. There was just so much that happened that was so unnecessary. But anyway, we got it to a place, and as that was coming to the back end of everything, I mean, I'd constantly been thinking around, how you could create a stable commercial entity within South African cricket. I think, world cricket itself, bilateral cricket, the flow of money, the pressure on broadcasters, that South African cricket needed some form of commercial program or commercial entity that they could rely on an annual basis. And as you say, Cricket South Africa tried on 2 or 3 occasions, it failed, lost hundreds of millions of rands. And yeah, so we got the opportunity. I think the key was, right in the beginning, finding stable partners that could come on board. Obviously, we were very lucky with, the multi-choice Supersport group here in South Africa that backed the idea. And we built it slightly outside the federation, which allowed us, to create a franchise model and a good business structure to take forward. I think in the beginning, we weren't expecting 6 IPL teams, but through the bidding process, the 6 IPL teams really, were the strongest, I guess, bids that we received on a number of levels. And that's actually been, I would say, one of the big assets of why we've gone from strength to strength. And yeah, 2 years later, I feel like cricket's in a better place in South Africa. We've seen the fans come back. I mean, SA20, we had 380,000 fans come through our gates for each year now, which is enormous, considering where we were, new fans coming into the game. And I think also, Nas, being able to put our players up against high quality domestic competition where top international players are coming. Just think about playing in front of the production, the crowds, just trying to close that gap that was developing between our domestic game and the international game, I think has been key.
What do you think you've done well? Because out of all the recent additions to franchise cricket, and there have been many, it is the one that gets the best press. You speak to players, commentators, fans, people who watch on TV. They enjoy the SA20. What do you think you've done well so far?
Ness, I'd like to think there's a few things, but I think we've been very clear in what we wanted to achieve. I think being able to attract quality players, I think, is key. So having an equally competitive league, I think, is crucial. And I know the hundreds going through the process, and you can have many different franchise owners, but I think having 6 that are equally competitive, that want to invest in players, they want to win, is crucial from a cricket perspective, because then you start to set the standard across the board. And we're very fortunate that we've got our best South African players available for every season, and I think that's a big asset in terms of trying to build a league from scratch. And then you throw in world-class talent, and then there's exposure to top coaches, top medical, top physio that was falling away in South Africa. And then obviously there for us, Nas, I mean, in England, you guys are naturally blessed with the cricket-loving public and crowds and filling houses. But in South Africa, that was something that we really needed to resurrect. And so investing in stadium stuff for fans, entertainment, experiences for youngsters coming through. We actually it's amazing. I don't know if you remember the Benson Hedges days in South Africa, Nas. I don't know if you remember, those days. We actually, so many people come and, say it reminds us of those early days of Benson Hedges. But so, I mean, to see youngsters and many different walks of life coming back into the cricket stadiums, I think has been probably the biggest asset for us.
Was there much pushback beforehand? I mean, obviously, you mentioned the 2 failed attempts, hundreds of millions of rand lost. Did you feel that there was a kind of, tidal wave behind you, and that you had virtually unanimous support for setting this up? Or did you have to go out and persuade people and sell them the idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly, there's the initial work inside, here in cricket in South Africa, that you had to set up the base. You had to work through kind of the previous failures and see what was lurking in the backgrounds, and, work through kind of all those things so that when you do go to market, you're ready to go to market. I think we worked hard with Cricket South Africa and MultiChoice to kind of set the structure up. And, based off, the broadcast partnership with MultiChoice, we took that business model out into the public, or into private investment opportunities. And we had many conversations with people from around the world, franchise owners, potential franchise owners, meeting with many different people that were interested. I think the timing was also, we were very lucky with the timing, Nas, and the fact that, at this stage, franchises were established, in particular in the IPL. They were looking to grow globally. So the timing on a number of assets, I think, suited kind of what we were trying to build. And yeah, I think we must have spoken to about 35, 40 different entities. And then we handed it over to a bidding process with an audit firm. And yeah, we ended up with 6 IPL franchises.
Which was going to be my next question, because obviously England at the moment are going through this process with the 100, and the executives at the ECB have been very clear that they don't want only IPL owners. They want a broad mix of owners, whether it's private equity, American, whatever. I mean, it clearly wasn't a deliberate choice just to go for 6 IPL owners, because presumably that's where the highest bids came from. But do you recognize any potential dangers there? Have they been good partners to work with? And do you understand England's reluctance maybe to go down that solely IPL owner route?
No, I would say initially, I was a bit wary over the fact that you didn't have the South African entity involved, and how that would be received. But I think on the other side, it was actually received in the opposite, Nas. I think people and fans and, entities in South Africa were quite shocked that IPL franchises were looking to grow into the South African market. I think it was just the nature of where cricket was in South Africa. So to have 6 of these franchises of stature, coming into South African cricket, I think was a huge step for us in a positive direction. I think it kind of everyone stood back and said, okay, wow. I think that they, from our perspective, they've been a huge asset now. So I think, it's not only about the money, the bidding and all that stuff, the commercial side that people always talk about, but they experienced, they run their franchise, they're equally competitive. I mean, they are desperate to win tournaments. They invest in players. I mean, I think just how they take care of players in our tournament is, the feedback we get from players is just, and obviously you're talking from an England perspective, we're talking from a South African experience perspective, but the feedback we get from players in terms of how they managed, how they looked after their experiences through the tournament is incredible. And I think, Nas, it's very important in the 100 that you have an equally competitive environment. I think the last thing you want when you're building these leagues is to have one team that dominates or two teams that dominate year in and year out, and it's imbalanced. For us, we've gone down to the last weekend with qualification 2 years in a row, and I think that's been the exciting part from a cricket perspective. They're very good at fan engagement. They're very good at building that. They understand how to build their franchises, their fan bases. I mean, we thought it would take 4 to 5 years to build it up. Standing in stadiums in season 2 and seeing PE in orange and Cape Town in blue. It's just it's unique, and they've pushed us hard, and I think they challenge us on a global level, which is important for us.
Can I ask you a question? Because I know it's something you've written about. And from an England perspective, the balance between private equity and Smithy will know the game needs money. South Africa cricket needs money. English cricket needs money to continue on a path. But how do you balance that private equity coming in? And I think you've written about how they are concerned with making money and making it a profitable business, with the other side of things, with the history that we have in county cricket and domestic cricket and grassroots cricket, and not being too money driven and just worrying about looking to the future by keeping an eye on the past and keeping tradition going. Can they ever work together?
Can they be reconciled? Well, clearly they can be reconciled because it happens in India, say, where the IPL has its chunk. But of course, we've seen that the IPL grow and grow, and that's really the challenge. I think I think the ECB, naively, in my view, think that these two systems are just going to run alongside each other. That the private money that comes in will just recapitalize the county system. But what happens when that money runs out? When you've sold it once, the county system needs to be self-sustainable as well. And clearly, private investors, private equity, whatever it is, are in it for profit, and one understands that completely. But governing bodies and county clubs have broader responsibilities to pathways and producing cricketers. So that there is a clash there. I mean, we've seen it with the BBL, that initially the Big Bash, got a great advance, and people were thrilled with it, and then suddenly they expanded it, and then it lost a bit of its glitz and glamour because it was diluted. And is there a danger in South Africa? It's obviously gone very well, Smithy. Is there a danger that there'll be a desire to bring more teams in, expand the competition, and therefore you end up diluting it?
Yeah. Athens, we were 16 tournaments. I mean, we locked down any expansion for the first 5 years. So, after season 5, we could look at an expansion. I think there's a number of elements you got to look into that outside. Just, there's obviously the commercial stuff. But, does South African cricket have enough quality players to add another 2 teams? Where would you add them? Is there an opportunity to grow into Africa as well? Those are all questions I think that would have to be tabled. But I think, for me, it's in particular, we need to build the player base up in South Africa to have, another quality, 30 players that are going to be able to contribute to the standard of the league. I think we'll only know that in 2 or 3 years' time. I think now we're starting to develop players that are pushing for places. I mean, I would say like 3 years ago, if you were a batter in South Africa, you were never under pressure in a national team, I never thought I would see the day that we wouldn't have a batter have an average over 40, in the test side. So I think that's now starting to improve. You've seen 800s this year. You've seen, so you're starting to get players pushing for places. There's a lot of injuries, and there's still enough bowling depth coming through. So, hopefully that'll go from strength to strength.
You said one of the strengths of your competition is having your South African international players available. You had to make that very difficult decision at the start of 2024, not sending your first string test squad to New Zealand. How difficult a decision was that? And how was that decision made with the board?
Look, Nats, we built this with Cricket South Africa, even though we like the business arm for the league. They're alongside us. They're majority shareholder. I think the toughest decision was right in the beginning, trying to work with Cricket Australia over those 3 ODIs. When Cricket South Africa took the decision to build it, the cancellation of those first 3 ODIs was the big decision. I would say the test mix-up, it just was a silly thing that should never have happened. It's a complex behind-the-scenes issue, but it should never have happened, and it should never happen again. We've obviously done extensive planning on the FTPs now going forward with Cricket South Africa. And yeah, I was as disappointed in that as anybody else. But when you've committed at the beginning to you're going to have your best players available to the franchises that are going to invest, the broadcasters that are going to invest, the sponsors, then you have to be clear that that's the commitment you've made. And what happened was the IPL shifted down, Australia Cricket Tour shifted down, and then suddenly from a free tour, South Africa was in a window where they couldn't play, and it just wasn't dealt with in the right way, and unfortunately, it was disappointing.
But you are world cricket's most successful test match captain. You are South Africa's most successful test match captain. Wasn't there a little part of you that saw that squad go across and thought, we need to keep test match cricket going in the right direction? We're not being fair on test match cricket. I know South Africa got hit. Steve Waugh came out in uproar that this is the start of the end of test match cricket. Do we not all have to keep an eye on it?
Oh, we do, Nas, and I think it's a much deeper question than just those 2 test matches. I think it is, and I'm saying to you, it's disappointing that it happened. It should never happen. But I think Test cricket in itself is challenged because of the commercial side of the game. I think you just think about broadcast deals of paying more for T20s, they cost less, and most CEOs that are under commercial pressure are going to choose to play more of those than they are going to choose to play test matches. And that's the unfortunate thing. And, there's been many debates over whether there should be a fund to protect Test cricket. I mean, Test cricket for me is never going to be more than a 6 or 7 nation format. It's never going to grow to 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 like T20 potentially can, But so I think there should be more effort made to make sure that there's a consistent sort of bilateral program for Test cricket. But Nas, if we don't keep South African cricket strong, there won't be any of these conversations that we happen to having anyway about 2 test matches. You know what I mean? I think that's the reality. You want to be able to make sure there's quality players, there's good commercials, so that South African cricket can keep pushing England, India, and Australia over the years.
And final question on the SA20 then, before we move on to maybe South Africa's test team, the World Test Championship and other matters. How are you going to judge the success or otherwise of the competition down the line? Is it the strength of South African cricket in its entirety? Is it, the kind of financials of the competition? Is it the crowds coming through the gate? Is it a combination of all those things?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all those things. I think for a tournament like this to be successful, you need new fans coming into the game. You got to start building fan bases up that grow with you in years to come. And I think that will be important from a fan base perspective in South Africa. But I think we want to see a strong Proteas team throughout. So if we can keep creating a competition in South Africa that exposes our players to international standard hopefully closes the gap between kind of where our domestic structure was going and the performance there and the standards there to where like international cricket is, then I think we'll be doing a good job. I mean, I think unearthing players, bringing players through. We're also investing in grassroots. We started a schools program this year, over 500 schools, girls and boys. We've got an umpire exchange program with the 100. We've started girls under 19 camps. So it's, and our franchises are starting to build development programs as well. So alongside Cricket South Africa, we're also doing a lot of grassroots work now that hopefully will continue to grow in the system, along with, hopefully a very successful event every year.
And what about South Africa's Test team then? 7 wins on the bounce, a final place in the World Test Championship in June against Australia. How do you look at this team? How do you judge it as a Test match team at the moment?
Yeah, well, they've produced some exciting results, as you say. 7 from 7 in Test cricket. No one can really argue with that. I think if I think back over the last couple of years, our bowling has always been pretty high standard. We've always been able to produce really decent fast bowlers. I think Keshav Maharaj are probably our most solid slow bowler that we've had in years. It's always been the batting that's been a bit scary to watch at times. And I think there's been, some consistency. I think the team looks like they're playing for each other. There looks like there's a bit of that grit back in that Test side. And it's been good to watch. I think, for us to have these positive stories with it, if you think about the last year, we've had our girls, our ladies in the final of a ICC event. We've had our men in a final and a semi-final, and now World Test Championship final. I think it's been great for South African cricket.
And it shows the job that you're doing and everything that you talk about, because by increasing your domestic structure and your franchise structure, the depth is there. I mean, I think you've had a lot of injuries to bowlers, but any bowler comes in and does well. I think in this cycle, there have been 1400s by 9 different batters. So it's not been the same players that have been contributing. It shows the depth in South Africa cricket, what we've seen recently.
Yeah, and hopefully that'll go from strength to strength. I mean, I think you need to give Temba credit. I think he's 60, 70 Test matches, had a pretty up and down batting career, but I think over the last year and a half, he's been extremely consistent and he's been the sort of stable performer. And they've tried to build a unit around him. Shukri's quite a wild card in terms of some of his selections. Is interesting in terms of how he goes about it, but he does seem to have built a team that wants to play for each other. He's built a bit of that old school, grit back into the environment, which is good. And you're right, Nass. I mean, to see that many hundreds. I mean, if I think back to our time, we used to pride ourselves on, those stats. How many hundreds in a season between the top 6? Could we get 400 in an innings in every Test match? Those, how many 100 partnerships? Those are the things that are fundamentally build a batting unit in Test cricket. And I think modern day cricket is very different in terms of the way that they operate. And technically, with the balls moving around, most modern day batters, don't have their skills and their sort of skill sets are set up very differently. So it's good to see some of that come back into our units.
And the World Test Championship, I mean, South Africa have had an unusual route there. You mentioned the 7 wins on the bounce, which nobody can argue against, but clearly the World Test Championship, which was set up for the right reasons, but is flawed in its conception, because you got there without playing England, without playing Australia. I heard somebody say it's like getting to the Wimbledon final without playing any seeds, but not necessarily South Africa's fault, but it is the way the World Test Championship is structured. Do you see any way around that? Any way to improve that, given the limitations of the calendar and the cramped schedule that we have?
Look, my answer to that would be we're in the World Test Championship final. And we got a chance to win the trophy, the Mace. I think that's key. You got to do what you got to do, and South Africa have done that. I think over the last couple of years, their win percentages are actually pretty decent if you go and look over a period of time. And I also do feel for the ICC, because I was just looking at a note this morning at how much England and India are playing each other over the next period. and Australia and vice versa, it gets extremely hard for the the other nations to kind of get time against I mean, I think India are probably the best at because they're commercially so reliable for every other nation. It's just but where do you find with the top three nations playing each other all the time, and you can only imagine in the next FTP cycle how much that's been tied up in the background. How does the ICC create a structure that's fair in the top three's eyes? It's and I think what world cricket needs South Africa strong. It needs West Indies strong. It needs Sri Lanka to get better. Otherwise, can you see a world where there's only three nations playing cricket into the future? I think that we need to think
which
clearly.
is an interesting comment, because obviously this week there's been some stories about a potential restructuring of Test cricket into tiers or divisions, and it seems to me that the two tiers and divisions are very different things. Divisions implies, to me at least, a chance for promotion and relegation, and I'd be fine with that. I think what I'd be anti against is tiers where there's no chance for the bottom tier to get into the top tier, and it becomes a kind of entrenched elite. What have you made of the stories this week around a potential reorganization? I mean, it's down the line; it can't happen until 28, but clearly there are conversations happening.
Yeah, and that's because I mean I don't have enough detail. I mean, I don't know in terms of how many teams in a division. Are they looking at six and six? Because maybe that's a little bit more palatable. Or so 3 and 3. You don't know. So I think I said in the beginning of the show, I don't think Test cricket is more than a 6 or 7 nation format anyway. That it's going to be, if you can keep 5, 6, 7 nations strong and competitive, people will always watch Test cricket. Yes, I mean England and Australia are blessed with a cricketing culture, but if a good team comes to South Africa, we see good crowds, we see interest in Test cricket. So I think that's an opportunity. But I mean, obviously, and it's an interesting point for the women's game as well. Now, I think the women's game is probably structured the best out of everything. You think they've got their windows for their leagues. White ball cricket structured, the bilaterals are structured, and you're seeing the need for more Test cricket there. Do they start doing it? Do they start messing with the calendar? I mean, I think those are the interesting debates, because the calendar's a mess, as you say. But I think a bit more information needs to be sort of dashed out, and the problem is, everyone's going to fight for themselves going forward. Commercially, everyone's. I mean, outside probably England and Australia, everyone's under pressure. That new FTP cycle. If I was CEO or president of Cricket South Africa, I'd be properly in the ring there, fighting for content.
Am I just being naive? I mean, I've watched Test match cricket this last year, and it has been absolutely fabulous. It has been box office. Some of the cricket, some of the crowds, only some of the crowds, not all around the world, but some of the contests. It has been incredible watching. Why do people keep saying it is a difficult product to sell? I mean, what have viewing figures been like in South Africa? What have crowds been like in South Africa for recent Test matches? You've won 7 on the bounce. Generally, when any side go on that sort of run, there's a momentum of groundswell of opinion that we want to be part of this. I just feel like I'm missing something, that I'm watching great Test match cricket, but people keep saying it's not the product for the future.
That certainly hasn't come from South Africa now. I mean, the thing is, commercially, it's under pressure now. So I think we have to admit that it's
What were the crowds like? Sorry to interrupt. What were the crowds like in the recent series?
So, I mean, hit and miss in certain parts of the country. I mean, like Boxing Day was decent in Pretoria for Boxing Day. Newlands, I think the first 3 days were cracking. And Nasser's right. The team has done well. There's a good upswell. There's a bit of positivity around them qualifying, but there's a lot. And you can just feel, the love for Test cricket and the game of cricket coming back because of the performances and the storylines. I mean, certainly, there's a strong traditional fan in South Africa that loves Test cricket. They want more Test cricket. But for a nation like South Africa, Sri Lanka, West Indies, it's a balancing act in terms of trying to get the commercials right with keeping the traditions of the game going. But that's you're right, and I think a lot of it's stemming from South Africa qualifying for the World Test Championship. That really is the truth. Australia live in their own world. They
How do you see that contest? I mean, it's a while away. Nobody knows quite, who's going to be fit and what teams will turn up there. But how would you look at that one-off contest over 5 days? And just from our perspective, because in England we are, thinking ahead to the next 12 months where England play 5 tests against India and then, of course, go down under for the Ashes. I don't know whether you've had half an eye on Ben Stokes and Brendan McCullum and their Baz bowling. What have you made of it, and how do you see the Ashes down the line?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've enjoyed it. I mean, for me, anything that creates talking points for Test cricket, I think is fantastic. Obviously, you guys follow the results and live the results a little bit more as a pure England fan, but I just think they've created so many talking points for the game of Test cricket across the world. And I walk the streets here and people talk about it all the time. Did you see that 100? Did you see the way they played? And that's great. Obviously, as a cricket connoisseur, you watch and you think, can it always work? And you debate all these things.
Did you watch Sam Constas on Boxing Day as a former opener who was not quite as dour and defensive as me, but was gritty and old fashioned in a way that was then? What did you make of Sam Constas?
Listen, I think I would have been like Ness, every dismissal after that, I would have been right all over him. Telling him to come back down to earth. But yeah, I mean, again, it's like I watch my kids. My boys now 11 and 8, and they talking about Sam Constas. I don't know that they didn't watch the innings, but they've somehow seen it somewhere, and they like somehow they don't even know what he looks like. But Sam Constas is their guy. It's just made headlines, and and that's what I'm saying. Those type of storylines I think are so exciting for cricket. You love them. I mean, it's great. I mean, I can't. If I think back to my career, walking out facing my first test, Lee, McGraw, Gillespie, and Warren, with how that would have gone down, wrapping my first ball for first over for 6. But listen, I'm not surprised the Indian players got stuck into him at some point.
Yeah. And tournament gets underway on Friday. Lots of English players involved. Ben Stokes, not of course because of his hamstring injury, but are you all set for a cracking tournament? Do the crowds look good in advance, and you've got a requisite number of top class overseas players there?
Yeah, I mean, what was Ben bowling all those overs in that last test?
You were cursing him, were you, from afar?
I was like, what are you doing? No, look, we were very excited to have him. Yeah, I mean, from the start, actually, some of the top English players have been horrific. And I remember having conversations with them when we were building it, and them taking the leap of faith over RLT and Big Bash and various other things to give South African cricket a chance was exciting. And opening game of our first tournament, Jofra running into Joss Butler, is something South African cricket needed to experience again. And this year we've got some class players coming again, across the board, and a good mix. Obviously, the English players in particular stand out with like the Williamsons and the Conways, but some great Afghanistan players here like Rashid and Omazai and Mujib, and and to name a few. Obviously Johnny Bairstow and Kane Williamson's class. So just to name a few, we've got some high quality players here that I'm excited. When I look across the teams, they're looking equally competitive and strong. So I'm hoping we get and unearth a few youngsters. We introduced a rookie program 2 years ago. This is now our second season of it, and I'm hoping to see one or two of those youngsters, hopefully come through in this season.
Fantastic. Well, good luck with it all. Friday, is it kicks off, obviously.
Thursday, and you got to say it before I leave. Geberge. It's in rename Port Elizabeth.
Yeah.
I'm not brilliant at it, but so opening game Thursday.
And most importantly, will you be at Lord's for the World Test Championship final? We can relive that moment at Cover Point.
I'm coming in a week before, Nas.
I'll try and remember your name, Smithy.
Look forward to seeing you guys. Thanks for the support
Yeah,
today.
good luck Thursday. I hope the competition goes well. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you in June. And well done, South Africa, on making the final.
Yep, indeed.
Thanks, dudes. Cheers.